All right, so for each image, we'll look at the exposure as usual. We'll talk about the color, and we'll also talk about the light, because the light can really influence how we're seeing the color. I'll split this into three critiques. We'll first start off with blue and yellow, then we'll go into green and magenta, and then red and cyan. So we're starting off here with Gabby's image, and she has all these little bows that she has gathered and put them on a white background. So the blue seems to have a good exposure on it, but the white looks a little bit dull. So you might want to raise your exposure so that that white that's surrounding is a little bit further to the right, right? When we're looking at the histogram, we want that white to be represented with a big jump over here on the right side of the histogram. Your settings are ISO 100, 50 millimeters, f1.8 at 1/125th of a second. That 1.8 is working really well here to give us a shallow depth of field, so you bring us right into where you want us to look without having a lot of extra focus, so we don't have to look at the detail of each of these little bows, just the area that you want us to. So that was a really good choice of aperture. The light that's coming in is really nice as well. It's coming across, it's softer light. You can look at the shadows here, how they have a softer edge to them, or you might not even see them. So it's softer light, and because this fabric is reflective, we have some nice highlights that creates a difference with each of these, right? We're able to see the depth of each of these little ribbons opposed to seeing them all with flat lighting and not seeing each individual one. So that was a really good choice. Here we have this fun image for the blue and yellow. So again, you're at ISO 100, 85 millimeters, so a little bit of a longer lens. F4 at 1/250th of a second. All of those settings look good. And here you can see how you're having more information on the right side of the histogram, and the whites and the blues are pushed on that side, so that's looking good. You have the blue on her stomach and the yellow on her back and then on their arms. And then I love that you've had them in really neutral clothes, so there's nothing that's distracting about their clothing as far as the colors go. And then you have this subject is wearing like a Black Lives Matter shirt and it says stand together. And that is in yellow. So that gets more importance in this image because you're really just utilizing blue and yellow for your subjects as their main color. So that brings out the importance of this here. And then by having that shallow depth of field with a longer lens, the greenery in the background really falls into the background. The light that you're working with is harsh lighting as it's coming across your subject and it's illuminating the subjects fine. I think you could play with the lighting and the way your subjects are standing a little bit in order to get the best lighting on your subject, right? So it's creating more depth on each of your subjects. And that might be having that directional light still, but have a little bit of a softer quality to it. But overall, two really smart images. You were paying attention to your crop in both of them. They both have good or like really close to good exposures. And then here we can see that you moved back for some of your images. You got closer. Here you played around. I can't quite see what's going on here, but with a whole different scene. So really fun images. We can tell that you spent some time on that. These two are from Eva, and she's at ISO 4000. So for this image, I'd bring down that ISO. You don't need such a high ISO. Your subject's still here, so there's no reason to have such a high ISO. You can just set up on a tripod. You have a really long lens that you're dealing with, a 145 millimeter lens, and that allows that f5.6 to fall out of focus really quickly. And then you're at 1/30th of a second. And I think that 1/30th of a second is where the issue is. So again, I think it's just that you're not on a tripod for this image, or if you were on a tripod, you just hit your camera a little bit too much. So we just see a little bit of movement happening here with that longer exposure. So remember, if you're hand holding, you always want your shutter speed to be faster than your focal length. So here you'd want to be at 1/60th of a second or faster. And that would require you to have an even higher ISO, and we don't want that. We can already see the digital noise in this image. So bringing down your ISO and just setting up on a tripod would allow you to have a long exposure for this. But here we're looking at, it looks like sort of a globe, but that we're looking at different stars and different constellations. And then this image has really beautiful light on it. So here you have this nice soft light on your subject, and that guides us right to the leaf. Where here you have this bright area down here where the light is bringing our eye to the wrong part of the image. So the lighting here is much more successful. Again, you have that high ISO, so I bring that down, still shooting with a longer lens, but here we don't have any camera shake. It's a nice sharp image, and maybe that's because you have that faster shutter speed. But really clear image, beautiful light on your subject. You have that bright yellow from the leaf with, it looks like maybe a pot or a bucket behind it of a bright blue. So these are like the highest points of both of these colors, right? You're getting the richest, brightest blue and yellow. So that pop that you're getting between them is even stronger. Nice job simplifying this image and finding the right light for this image. Oh shoot, your contact sheet is really small, 600 by 700, so we can't really get in there and see to give you much feedback, but it looks like you have maybe feeding some goats. It looks like there's a lot of different things going on here that would be fun to get in there. All right, and then these are Vince's images. So you're at ISO 1250, and you can easily see the digital noise from this, right? Especially if we look on this side of the image, how you have those splotches of red. It also looks a little pixelated, but we have definitely digital noise happening up here. And then you're at 31 millimeters, f4 1/2500th of a second. So really fast shutter speed. So you're in a tricky situation here, right? You want a fast shutter speed because you're dripping this dye into the water and you want to be able to get that stillness. You don't want to have the movement of it. Like your fire image last week, you want that fast shutter speed. So here you had to raise the ISO, but what I would do instead would be bring more light into this situation or move this beaker closer to a window so you're able to have more light on your subject. That would allow you to have that ISO much lower so we could still see everything nice and still, but you wouldn't have to have the digital noise and the negative repercussions of that. But great idea here, photographing the water. It makes me wonder what you're going to do for your final project. Is your kind of fire last week, water this week, and what's coming up next for us? And then this is a great image. You're at ISO 640, so a higher ISO, but I'm not really seeing that digital noise here. A little bit up in here, but not much. You're at 30 millimeters, so wider angle, f 4.5 at 1/40th of a second. And everything's nice and sharp here. So that 1/40th of a second you were able to hand hold. And you photographed your wife with these blue fun sunglasses on her head and a yellow bandana. And then she's also wearing a blue shirt and maybe even has a little bit of blue eyeshadow on. So really cohesive. And then everything else is really neutral. So skin tone, hair, background is all really neutral. So we're just able to focus on these little areas. And then you have a shallower depth of field, so we don't need the detail of the shirt. We don't need the detail of her face as it goes down. You really want to keep our attention right here. And then the last thing that's working really well in this image is the light. So it looks like you're using window light. It's fully illuminating the side of her face. It gives good depth and it's a pleasing, flattering light on her. So this is excellent light that you're using. And I just want to point out also that 30 millimeters, how that's kind of distorting this image. And that's not good or bad. It's just something I want you to recognize as to how big these sunglasses look. And then her ears look small. And then her shoulders are starting to look really small. So that's happening because of that wider angle lens. And you have a bunch of different images here, but the image that you chose is definitely the strongest of these. And then this is a nice image as well, again, using nice softer light coming across your subject and including those two colors. This blue is more of a cyan than a blue, same here. So this was a smarter decision for your final image. And then this last image here is by Marcus. You're at ISO 800. 24 millimeters, f 4.5 at 1/4 of a second. And it looks like you're pretty still here. We don't have any issue with the camera shake. We have blue, you have a blue chair. It's a pretty straightforward image here. Looks like you're using indoor light. It's just hard light coming from above onto your subject. And then here, this image is much more interesting as you have the blue and yellow combined. It starts to have more of a narrative. Again, you're at ISO 800, 18 millimeters, so really wide angle. And just like we saw with Vince's image, we can see that the flowers here look really large compared to the armrest back here. So you can see how that distortion's happening because of the wider angle lens. F4.5 at 1/6 of a second, so those settings all look good. And you're pretty sharp here. I'm not seeing an issue. It looks like your point of focus is down here instead of up here. So I would change your point of focus on your camera to make sure that those flowers are in focus. The combination of the two subjects works really well. Working with a softer light here, not coming from straight above, but coming from an angle, like coming from a window, would allow a lot more depth to your subject. So that would be one thing that you could improve in this image, is the type of lighting that you're using. But you can see the interest in this image is much stronger than the interest in this image. And then these are just like changing your angle of view as you were photographing the chair. Getting really low and photographing the chair with the wide angle lens is kind of interesting because it's creating that distortion like we talked about with the flower image. And then moving through these, I would just find which image has the best point of focus because you kind of missed that on your first image.